Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in again to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast. This week, I have Nicholas Davenport with me. Nicholas is the founder and director of programming of Mind Body One. He has a bachelor's in psychology and master's in exercise science with a specialization in sports psychology. He works with some of the world's best performers, ranging from pro athletes, law enforcement, military, and businesses. He uses a unique approach, which he calls cognitive conditioning, that integrates psychology, cognitive science, and other human performance techniques to enhance performance. He is also an adjunct professor and researcher. Nick, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time for this.
Thank you for having me.
So just to start us off, can you talk me through your background in sport? I saw that you played baseball. You also played football. You ran track. Can you talk through a little bit about, your career as an athlete and then sort of how that's developed into what you do now?
Oh, yeah, that's crazy because literally it paralleled why I'm into this mental cognitive space, because I've been an athlete at the lowest form since I was 5. I played baseball for my first love. I got in the track and field around 7, 8. And obviously that's the young ages, so it wasn't nothing top tier yet. But around middle school ages, I started getting into more like the higher level because I'm from South Florida. And I don't know if you may know, this is a very competitive region down here for almost every sport, but especially the speed sports like football, track and field, and even baseball. So I always had to have that mental edge in a sense because these guys are coming for your head every play, every game. So my career in those sports kind of shaped me because I had an event around middle school and I was one of the top long jumpers in the county. And I had an event where I lost by 1 space and I didn't like how that felt. So the next year in 8th grade, when I came back, I spent the whole summer studying plyometrics, exercise physiology, a little sports psychology. And the thing is, I didn't really understand it fully. So I would just read it online. And this is like 2002. So this was before Google, I think. I think Google came out like 2004. So I had to use AskJeeves.com. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So, I would ask Jeeves, I literally, Jeeves, how do you jump further? Jeeves, how do you run faster? And I would get these websites that would show me routines. I didn't fully understand it, but at 12, 13 years old, I was learning like the most general human performance techniques, like plyometrics, biomechanics, and I guess that's something good to have down the road now. But it's like I didn't know what I was really learning, and then it helped me shape me. And then I came back next year and won it, and then went to high school, had a pretty decent career. But in college, I went for just track. I eventually faded away from my other sports, and I had a very lackluster career. I ended up losing my track scholarship, my academic scholarship. And this is where the mental muscle really came in. I was like, what do I do now? Like that's what got me here. I was fast, I was strong, I could jump, but now I really didn't have any of it. So that's why I really had to get tested. And fortunately, I would graduate with a psych degree and the rest is history. And I just thought to myself, what do I do with this? So that kind of opened up the door of like, okay, you did the muscle, now let's bring in the mental. And that's where that was about 2011. So pretty much 10 years, I've been making that climb.
Well, man, because just when you're bringing up that mental muscle, so I've been following your work. It started with watching some Phil DeRue videos, you working with some of his guys. And I don't think that was probably 2 years ago where I saw my first one then I started kind of following what it was you did. I don't think I actually learned your name until about a month ago because I'd always just knew you as Mr. Mental Muscle. And so just awesome. I love the brand. I love sort of the way you've brought that on. Cause as I said before we started the show, I think the cognitive side of sport is massively overlooked. People think if they're just big and strong and fast, then that's just going to take them everywhere. But, as you obviously know, there's so much more to it to create success in sport. And so for coming out of university with that psych degree, how has that kind of evolved from now, from that day, did you always know you wanted to go into the mental side of performance, whether that was athletes or whoever else, what was your vision then and sort of how has it shaped up now these years later?
So I learned the hard way. And if anyone else is watching who's doing a psych degree, I'm not trying to deter you, but unless you go master's or higher, there really isn't many opportunities in the workforce for psych degrees. That's just the truth. So I went to do a master's in mental health counseling to be a therapist. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense because I was uneducated on what you could do with a psych degree. So basically after a semester of 2, I'm like, I don't know if I want to listen to people's problems and vents and whatever. So I'm like, I guess I'll do it because it's a job, right? So I had a classmate named Nicole. I haven't talked to her since, but she doesn't know how defining this conversation was. So she said, "You're a former athlete. You probably would like sports psychology." I'm thinking like, why don't I know about this? Like, this is like 2012, so this is literally a year after undergrad. So I'm like, I wish I had this when I was an athlete because I had mental barriers that I had trouble getting through. So like a dummy, she said, "No, but there's no money there." And like a dummy, I was like, "I don't care." I switched my major immediately to sports psych. So basically around that time, I also got a fitness trainer certification. And I always wanted to work with athletes, but the money, especially starting out, is not with athletes. You probably know this very well.
Oh, yeah.
You got to go with the general population. So I got a job at LA Fitness while I was still doing the mental health and the sports psych stuff. And that's where Mental Muscle was born. It actually was on my birthday at LA Fitness. They had a big like event, and they had all these like girls with the, you know, the tight clothes with the energy drinks and stuff. And it was my birthday, and I never had an Instagram. So a girl took a photo with me. I forget her name, but she took a photo with me and she said, "Oh, you should put this on your Instagram." I'm like, "What's Instagram?"
I was
behind. So this is 2012, mind. So Instagram is still pretty new. So I'm like, "What's that?" So that same day on my birthday, November 3rd, I uploaded a profile with me and her, and I called it Mr. Mental Muscle, and the rest is history. So that was almost 10 years ago. So basically, I'm doing the fitness, but I want to work with athletes. So I did an internship working with an NFL combine prep with Patrick Peterson, who's still a current player for the Cardinals, I believe. I think just got traded. But anyway, so I was doing that, and I'm like, okay, I'm learning, but it's for free. So I'm not making any money. I got bills to pay. So my mindset was, how can I bring all this together? Like you said, the mental cognitive space is obviously needed. Like how you think under pressure is going to determine how you execute, because the biggest people get beat. The strongest, the fastest people get beat all the time. You've seen it when the underdog makes the play. So what is the separation? So at that time, I wasn't as versed as I am now, but I'm like, there's something here. And I made it my duty from that day back in 2012 that I got to make this combined. And at first, it didn't really make too much sense. It was more so fitness or the cool name. Mental Muscle Fitness is what I called it. And I was Mr. Mental Muscle. So it was more so just regular workouts. And I would do like maybe some kind of self-talk type of thing, motivational goal settings, but nothing deep. So that journey would go about, I'll just fast forward to 4 years. It's about 2015, 2016. And I was working at an addiction center under a psychologist because I had a daughter. I needed more money. And I tried odd jobs. I was even a teacher for a little bit, and I got let go from that job. And I just didn't know where I was going to go because I'm like, I got these degrees. I got this know-how, but where do I fit in? No one wants me. I had a teaching job that I thought was secure, but it wasn't. And I even applied for 56 more jobs in that same school board and got no hiring. So that's why I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this myself. So when I got the job with the addiction center, this guy was like, "You have a degree in sports psych? You're overqualified for this. It's only $11 an hour." But I knew in my head, I'm like, but I want to learn from you because he did something called Neurofeedback. So it's basically you took these EEG headsets that read your brain waves and you use it with the clients to help with their brain function. So I didn't really know what it was, but I'm like, this seems interesting. And even though it was only $11 an hour, I learned so much. I did all the intakes. So I learned how to do clinical intakes from the psychological perspective. I learned how to do neurofeedback readings with the EEG, so that's medical. And I was learning all this for chump change, but you couldn't put a price on that value. And little did I know, I was creating Mind Body One. Mental Muscle was still there, Mental Muscle Fitness, Mental Muscle Performance, but it was like I saw the fitness industry was going in a direction that I didn't like. Granted, there's still a niche for people really like you or Phil who have a real know-how, but I saw a lot of gimmicky stuff that I did not like. So I was like, know what?
Oh, yeah.
It's time to jump the paradigm and shift it. And I said, Mind Body One. And I haven't looked back. So I took literally everything I learned from undergrad, master's, working at the addiction clinic, being a teacher. And I said, all those elements are needed to perform. You need to be able to perform physically. You need to be able to think under pressure, control your emotions, react, make decisions. And this all comes from the brain. So that's kind of where it all transpired. And then and I know I've done a lot of stuff out there, but my great grandmother also would pass during this time frame from Alzheimer's. So I thought that as a sign, like, yeah, I'm supposed to do this.
Yeah, something on the
like,
mental side just makes sense. Like,
exactly. So I never looked back since then. So
man, I absolutely love that because, you know, like you said, the money in the beginning when you're working in this industry is definitely not with athletes. Like I know I've been through my fair share of, you know, the first job I had in the industry after graduating university, I had a total of, I think, 10 hours a week, but like it would be 1 hour at 9 a.m. and then 2 hours at like 6 and 7 p.m. The pay was like $16 an hour. So like I was back and forth to the gym all day, making about $800 a month. And like, just, again, it was one of those things that, I love the work itself, but oh my God, there were so many days of like, how am I going to do this?
For those days all too well.
Oh yeah. So can you kind of pinpoint a time where you feel like this really took off? Because obviously your work has gotten your work is big now. Like I see videos of you in all kinds of different facilities, like whether it's giving talks, like putting people through sessions like around what you do. Is there a time where you feel like, your work sort of started getting understood, how important this stuff was? Like you said early on, it didn't really click maybe, but was there a time that you can kind of find that it really started to take off and people started to see the value of it?
So this is actually easy to pinpoint. So going back to Phil DeRue, so give you a little backstory. Me and Phil went to high school together, so we know each other a long time.
Oh, that's
we
great.
even sat right at graduation because my last name Davenport DeRue, so he was right before me when they called us. So we go way back.
Yeah.
So people were like, "Gosh, Phil." I'm like, I've known him before he was DeRue Strong, but he was always like me. He was always like knowledgeable. Like when we were training in the weight room, me and him were probably the most knowledgeable guys on the team, football team. Everyone else like come to us for workouts. But anyway, I hit up Phil. Like we always stayed in touch. When you graduate, you may not talk every day, but we stayed in touch. So one day, I won't forget this day. It was September 22nd. It was a Saturday, and I hit him up just randomly, like, "Hey, I've been doing some stuff with the mental, and I think some of your fighters might like this." He's like, "That's funny. I was just talking to Dustin Poirier about that, and he said he wants to do some of that stuff. Come through Monday." So I hope if Dustin sees this, hope he doesn't get mad. At that time, I really wasn't following MMA like that, so I maybe knew Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor, Anderson Silva. So I knew a few names, but I didn't really follow it like that. Yeah. So when I met him, I didn't really know who I was meeting. So I come in Monday, and he wanted me to test it out with him and show him first at like 3:00. So I teach part-time at a college. So I rushed from class right down to the American Top Team, and we get there, and I show him some stuff. He's like, "Bring this back at 6:30. Fox Sports is going to be here with us." I'm like,
"Excuse me?"
Okay. But the problem was I had another class. So that was my little break. I had like an hour and a half break before I had to go back and teach till 9:00. So granted, that was my main, at that time, I would say that was still my main income. Now it isn't, but it was still my main income. So it's like, I can't just cancel class. But the beauty of college, you can kind of do that. It's not really it's frowned upon, but I'm like, hey, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I rushed back to my facility I had up in Boca Raton down here, ran every single light. I didn't stop it. I didn't care because that's dangerous. I know kids at home don't do that, but I was like, I got to get there and get back. So I get back to campus. Luckily, the campus was like 4 or 5 miles away, so it wasn't too far from ATT. So I get to campus, huffing and puffing, running up to the door, put a sign on the door, cancel class, as students are already walking in. And I'm like, I'm sorry for the inconvenience, guys. I'll explain next week. But class canceled. Bye. And ran back. I got to ATT at like 6:22, set up, cameras came, and the rest is history. So I did work with Dustin, and that was when he was fighting Anthony Pettis. And he went on to win that fight. He would win the next 5 fights until he fought Habib. And then he hasn't lost other than Habib. So that blew it open. I can't deny that was what blew it open. I got some attention before that, little attention, but that definitely opened up the door worldwide.
Man, I mean, it just right place at the right time stories. Like you don't get much better than that. Like I love that. I love hearing stories like that, especially like you not knowing really who he was at that point, and then bring this back at 6:30. Fox Sports is going to be here. I'm just like, what?
If you watch that interview, you might not even realize that was people who've seen it probably say, "Oh, they're probably been working for a while." Like I met him at that time. 6:30 is when I met him, and then we did a full I had like a minute worth of time, so that was cool too. So you're seeing us cohesively working, and people probably assume like, "Oh, cool," not knowing I don't even know this guy yet. And now looking back 4 years later, we're cool. Like we've done things, like we had dinner, like so. It's just crazy how you would never know that was the story behind it. I don't talk about that too much.
Yeah. Oh man, that is super cool. I'm really glad I got to hear that because like I've been following MMA for a while, and like I've actually in my own career been fortunate enough to actually start working with some professional fighters here in Calgary. And so Phil Daru has been one of the people that I follow quite closely to, get different training principles, things like that from all of his work. Because obviously, as you know, if you've known him for that long, he's out there and he's everywhere. He's got, I actually had him on this show not too long ago. By the time this one comes out, his will have been released. So yeah, so to be able to hear the connection there is really cool. And then can you talk through a little bit, so obviously at this point you're doing this cognitive conditioning stuff. You're doing this work now. Sorry, I keep stumbling over my words here, but after that Fox Sports Day, what was it that kind of changed? Like, how was it different after that?
So it got a lot of eyes on me from the MMA world, just fans, not necessarily practitioners or clients, but a lot of people who love Dustin started rushing over to my page saying this is next level. And that was a gift and a curse because I pride myself on being multifaceted. So the gift was the whole world knew who I was. Well, not the whole world, but a lot of different regions of the world had eyes on me. Yeah. So basically, that was great because being a small fish in a small pond, now I'm a small fish in a big pond. So that was good. But the downside was I was getting pigeonholed in just MMA. And remember, up until that point, I had zero connection to fights, sports. So it's like, I'm known for this now. But the downside was I didn't want people to think, oh, this is fighting stuff. This is fighting stuff. Remembering Mind Body One literally deals with all types of demographics. And at that time, I had done stuff with different sports, different populations. So it was a gift and a curse because I can't get mad at the exposure, but I didn't want to be a one-hit wonder. That was probably the biggest thing because, okay, he won a fight. He did this thing that looks like a video game or like a toy. And at first that got under my skin because remember, I've never been in this big of a light. And I even got some like racial slurs. I got called stupid. Like I got called everything but a child of God. So for someone who's not a celebrity, that did get under my skin a little bit.
Yeah, but I can only imagine.
Yeah, so it was like hard for me, but obviously I had to practice what I preach and get my mind right. And I got through it, but basically from then on, I just had to like say, I could be a one-hit wonder. So using my background of the actual science and knowledge that I know, and I know we're gonna talk more about the science, I use that to kind of fuel my creativity because I consider myself a very creative person. If you see my drills, I try to make them innovative, but make sense. I'm not just gonna do something to look cool for Instagram. So everything I post, I would say around that time, I got way more consistent with my posting because before that, I was very bad. Now I post almost every day and I try to keep consistent content. So it was like, I got to keep pumping it out. And I have to make it good as well. Quality, and people say quality over quantity. I'm like, I'm in a kind of an industry where not many people know about this. So I got to give you both because you got to know what it is before you can appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, quantity and quality is going to be the real answer, and like as much of that as you can. But I like that too. Like it's always crazy to me, you come out with this thing that's a little bit out there, something that the world hasn't seen before, and then how people's first instincts can be, going that negative. It's just, I've never understood that mindset, right? It's like you see something new and it's like, oh, that's stupid. It's like, well, this world-class athlete thought it was pretty good. So if it helps him, maybe it could help you too. Like
that was my logic though. That was really, I'm thinking when before the Fox Sports countdown came out, I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, the world's going to see what I can bring. And granted, there was some people who did, oh, this is cool, next level.
Yeah, of course.
But there was a lot of like, oh, this is BS. This is not backed by science. He's going to get knocked the F out. And it's like funny because he's only lost once. So yeah. And that loss was not a knockout. So I'm just saying he's never been knocked out.
and I mean, to be fair, that loss was to a guy who has never lost. So.
Oh yeah. You can't just that he lost to the current pound, or not current. I think he just got taken off, but was the pound for pound champion.
Number one. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, like pretty tough to discount the way that Dustin Poirier trains. Like something he's doing is working. That's.
But hey, there's always going to be those naysayers and those trolls. So I've gotten used to it now, and I troll them back now.
Oh yeah, and I mean that's got to be the best part of it, right? As your name builds more, being able to just send a little bit of that stuff back. Like, I just wanted to take a quick break to thank our sponsor, Perfect Sports. One of my favorite products of theirs that I've tried so far is the chocolate peanut butter Diesel New Zealand Whey Protein Isolate. What's really cool is that it's an all-natural flavor, and I've confirmed that it's 100% peanut-free. In fact, their whole facility is peanut-free. Due to New Zealand's stringent laws regarding herbicides, pesticides, antibiotics, growth hormones, and GMO crops, as well as the ideal growing conditions in the country, Diesel New Zealand Whey Isolate is as clean as protein can get. Coming from someone who has had difficulty digesting whey protein in the past, I can honestly say Diesel is the best product I've ever used. Not only that, but Diesel is also Informed Choice approved. This is the global standard of quality control in sport nutrition supplements. This program allows companies to show that they have gone through vigorous testing of their products for a wide range of substances banned in sport. If you are taking supplements, this is the way for you to know exactly what you are putting in your body without taking any additional risk. Another great thing about Perfect Sports is they give you 100% transparency with complete ingredient breakdowns on their website so you can see exactly what it is you are consuming. To check out Diesel and the rest of the top quality products that Perfect provides, check out www.perfectsports.com and use the code Kenny20 at checkout for 20% off all your orders. And so talking about, this work, like as, the world kind of understands, you said, a bit of a gift and a curse because you got a little bit pigeonholed in that fight industry. And like, obviously you've done a good job since to be able to show that, it's more than just for fight sports. Can you talk a little bit about like, what is it exactly that Mind Body does? Like, can you break it down for me a little bit? If somebody hasn't heard of cognitive conditioning before, like what is the approach?
So Mind Body One, the name in itself is the key general concept of it, because like you said earlier, performance comes down to not necessarily who's the biggest, fastest, strongest. And I think it's a given that we know this. So my approach with cognitive conditioning is we need to have almost a menu of items, just like at a buffet. Like you don't go to the buffet just to get one thing. You would go to like a restaurant that only serves that. So I look at the mental performance side of things just like that. So if you look at it from 3 tiers, I like to break it down as psychological, cognitive, and the neuro. So not to get too deep in the science, but we could if you want. But I use an analogy of a race car. So if I'm driving a race car, let's say a Ferrari F1 race car. So this is a very fast, very powerful, high-tech vehicle, right? So the cognitive aspect is the actual make and body of the car, the wheels, the tires, everything else. The neuroscience, that's the actual engine. That's what makes it go. Then the psychology is the driver. So using those same concepts, my goal is to make you the most efficient car, the most powerful engine, and the best driver. Because you can have a Ferrari, and if I put an average Joe that's never driven a race car in it, he's going to crash. He's going to spin out, whatever is going to happen. And that's your psychology. That's how you behave. Because if you drive erratically, you're anxious. Oh my God, you're going to mess up. Or the vice versa. If you're driving too cautiously, you're not going to win the race. So that's the psychology. Now, going to the neuroscience, that's the actual physical makeup of the brain. We got to remember the brain is just like a muscle. It's an organ, but it adapts just like a muscle does. When you do bicep curls, your biceps get bigger. You squat, your quads, your glutes get bigger. So when you do cognitive or mental training, the brain reshapes itself to accommodate those stressors. So that's the neuro side. And the cognitive is the actual processing, like I said, how the brake pads work, how the tires, the steering wheel, because the cognitive is the actual, if I take in information, where does it go? How do I give it and feed it back out to my behavior? So that's how they all work together. And that's why I love the race car analogy, because it's literally how we work in a sport, or even not even just sport, in general everyday life. So our goal is to get you be able to think efficiently, use your mental component from your emotional states, meaning not letting the stress, because we're going to have stress in whatever we do in performance. But can you keep your emotion regulated and do what you need to do? Then can you process the information being thrown at you, whether it's a ball coming at you, a punch, a kick, whatever it is, and do what you need to do? And 3, can we get you to build a physically strong brain that can take that kind of information, take that kind of stress, and get your mind right? So that's basically what Mind Body One's meant to do.
Man, I think that race car analogy is the perfect one. Like, I think that's, nailed it. Like that really, obviously there's a lot to it, but that really sort of got me thinking. It makes a lot of sense putting it in that respect. Like, you've got to have every element, right? And I think, just like you said, if you've got an average driver who's never driven a sports car before getting into this Ferrari, then, they're going to spin out, or they're not going to drive fast enough. They're not going to win the race. Like, if one element of that is off, the athlete is not the best that the athlete can be. And obviously I talk athlete, like I know you do work with, other populations as well, but just given my background, that's where my brain goes right too. So can you talk about, like, how do you integrate that into an athlete's training? So, if I'm seeing an athlete 3 times a week and we've got a good lifting, sprinting, conditioning program going, what's a good way to start integrating this kind of work into a training program?
So that's the beauty of it. It can be approached. I actually did my master's thesis on periodization for mental training. So it's crazy how they align with each other. So just how you would look at how you would program a physical workout, I would kind of do the same. So the first question I usually ask is, how am I going to work with this client? Because let's say they see a strength coach specific, like say with Phil Giroux. When I work with athletes with him, they're going to him already for strength training. So because I have methods that combine the movement with thinking, but I also have methods that are just the thinking aspect. So depending on what they're going through, I'll limit or use depending on that. So let's say they have a session where it's more high intensity lifting or more baseline endurance work or whatever it may be. I'm not going to tax them that much physically, and I'll kind of go back to the mental. But if it's like a session where I know they're not doing anything physical that day, and it's an off day, we can give a little bit, but it'll never be, put it like this, the goal will never be to super or physically tax them to the extent where it's going to interfere with their physiological adaptations. Like say 30 seconds of physical work with the mental task combined will be like the max. It won't be like anything over that. So it won't be something that's going to interfere with their strength training or the conditioning. Now, the other side of this, some people see me strictly for the mental. So if they're coming for that, then we can program that about once a week, usually for 1 hour. So the science basically says an hour a week is generally a good enough time to see adaptations, and that's about over 5 to 6 weeks. Because unlike physical training, you need to elicit more stress. But the thing is, physical has limitations. I can only do so much in one session. But the beauty is that 1 hour of mental training, I could technically do hundreds, even thousands of repetitions in that 1 hour, because most of our drills, to give people at home a picture, is, let's say it's a reactionary drill, meaning there's a stimulus presented. So I use something called like the fit light system. So they say they have 4 or 5 lights on a wall spread out a certain distance, and it'll be like red, use left hand, blue light, use your right hand to put it out. And they have to put their hand over that light, which is a sensor, and it records how fast it took them to perceive the light color, choose which hand, and put it out. So in a 1 minute duration, I could do about 75 reps. So it's like, you couldn't do that in a strength and conditioning workout, at least in one duration. You would be really pushing your limits, and the intensity would have to be pretty low for you to knock out 75 reps. Yeah. So the adaptation will be way different. But with mental training and cognitive performance, the adaptation and the intensity is more judged, not necessarily for effort. Like effort definitely plays on it, meaning how hard the drill is, but more so on the duration. So if I do something that lasts 1 minute versus something that lasts 10 minutes, the intensity is going to be way crazier, because imagine 10 minutes of looking at a screen or reacting to a light system or doing something that makes you have to stay thinking. Because if you do a set of 5 squats at like 80%, that's going to be heavy. You're going to get through it, but your mind's pretty much locked in on just getting up, getting down. Yeah. But if you're doing a cognitive task, your mind cannot take at least even a millisecond off, because that means you're going to be delayed on the response, which is going to inhibit your performance. So you have to stay constantly tuned in for whatever duration is. So that's how I look at it with the mental training. So I'll usually do maybe 5 to 6 tasks in an hour duration. I'll usually do 3 to 4 sets of each task. That way they're getting the volume, because like I said, if you look at a minute task, you're going to do between 50 to even 75 responses. If you do the math, that's about 300 responses per task, 5 responses. You're talking about over 1,000 responses in one session, which you could not do in one session. Now, over a week, you could knock out volume of 1,000 reps or whatever poundage. But with cognitive, we can do that in one session. So that's the beauty, I think, of it that people don't see, because you can do so much with less time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I like that, because that's one thing that I've always sort of thought about it, is like, I know obviously it needs to be trained, but I've always struggled with like how to do it. Like I try to throw little reactionary elements into drills when I'm working with athletes, but how to sort of put an extra focus on that, I've always kind of struggled with. Like, how much do you do? What kind of work do you do? Those elements that, like, I see some drills for you, but obviously, one of the prime rules I've tried to live by in the world of strength and conditioning is you don't just see something on the internet and go, oh, that's good for everybody. And like, I'm trying to learn more about it before I actually try to implement it. Right. So it's interesting to hear you put it that way. That's, I like that a lot. I hadn't even thought that, about that kind of volume in that amount of time.
And that's the thing. I love that you said that, because I hate to say it, where I saw the fitness industry going in 2012, 2013, when I started like turning my head to where I'm at now, I'm starting to see that happen now with the cognitive space and the mental space, because I don't knock them completely, because I get it. They want to give their athletes the best chance and they're zealous, and it's not, I don't think, harmful, at least in intention. But like you said, you don't just repeat what you see, because like not to my own horn, I've had a decade of experience in this from the actual science of it, Now, granted, I can get thrown in with anyone on IG because it looks cool or fun. Cool. But my approach is my secret sauce, because I've seen people literally like verbatim see what I do and then repeat it. Some tag me, some don't. But I'm not going to be mad, long as it's within realm of what the makes sense.
Yeah.
Because if you're just doing it to look cool and it doesn't have any rhyme or reason, there's no standardized measure. Because my clients, they'll tell you, they see me bring out a measuring tape when I set up the drills, and they like, oh, you're always measuring stuff. And I always say to them, you want this to make sense, right? Because if I don't measure it out, every time I give you will have no relevance. Because, hey, you did 0.35 on this one, but you did 0.28 on that one, but they weren't the same. So how can I tell if you're getting better or not?
Yeah.
It just means it was random. So a lot of people aren't doing that, and I can see it. And like I said, I'm not trying to, like, I'm obviously going to say names, but it's like, it is doing discredit to your athlete, because granted, it's good to have an external stimuli that's unpredictable and make you think and process. But my big thing is, how do we measure it? I want to make every drill I can, within reason, measurable. Because some, obviously, you don't have to have the fancy systems to measure it, but that's where understanding, because I can literally teach your listeners right now how to do a drill that requires no fancy equipment, but it's measurable and can make sense. So that's what matters. Can you measure it, and is it standardized?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's obviously key for anything, right? It's like you see improvement through measurements. And like, I've gone back and forth on some performance testing measures that I've used myself in the gym, just because, like, again, timing a certain sprint or something like that. Yeah, it's a good measure, but also, like, with the unpredictability of the game is your ability to take, a tenth of a second off of that sprint time, the be all end all of how you're going to perform in the game. I think as we start looking more and more at the mental side, probably not. Like, yeah, you need to be able to sprint quickly. It's like, but if you can't make decisions that fast or anything like that, your tenth of a second faster sprint time probably not going to really be winning you any big competitions compared to the guy who's making faster decisions, still sprinting quickly, maybe a step behind you, but he's making those decisions that much faster.
Well, that's a perfect example, because the variance, let's be real, the variance in human performance, especially at a high level, is very minuscule.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, how much better physically are you than the next guy? Because if you look at the top level performance, if you say like track and field, like me being a former track guy, times are king. So if you look at the variance at the fastest people, they're only milliseconds apart. So it's like, how much of getting that time down through your physical training is really going to make you better? It really isn't, when you want to be honest with it. Now, maybe at the high school level or even lower, the guy who's physically gifted is going to kill everyone, because if you run like a 4.340 at 13 years old, that's elite level speed. You're going to destroy anyone in your age.
Yeah.
But when you go to the pro elite level, everyone runs 4.3. So how much more? And I've worked with, like I said, I'm not going to say names, but I work with these coaches who obviously it's needed. Like I said, I'm not going to denounce it. And just like me, I'm not going to say my stuff is the end all be all. It isn't. But if you took two, athlete A and athlete B, and the one who could take an information, make sense of it, not let outside stressors put them down, get deterred, I would take that athlete A if athlete B is the same thing, but he does the opposite. Because athlete A will be more consistent. Not saying he's going to be better every time, because athlete B, if their speed and the performance is the same, he's going to have times where he beats them, but I guarantee A will be more consistent, because that's where it comes down to. And not even just from the psychological level. There's been studies to show how mental fatigue, so basically give a quick science lesson, mental fatigue and physical fatigue as well as mental pain and physical pain are housed in the same region of the brain. So there's a region called the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC for short. And the ACC's job is to do a few things. It's also emotional regulation, reward response. So how we adapt to being able to withhold and inhibit things that aren't necessary. So like say, in a general sense, don't eat the cake when you're hungry, but you're on a diet. That's an example. That's the ACC at work. That's housed in our frontal lobe. So basically when it goes to pain and fatigue perception, when you have the neurons called the nociceptors, they send back up to the brain to tell you, ow, that hurts, or ow, I'm tired. When you train the mental fatigue doing like cognitive tasks like I do, you're training that same region to say, hey, I'm repetitively going through this exhaustion mentally. So I guess that should mean I could do it physically because it's the same region. It's kind of like hacking the brain. So it's not saying you can just neglect your physical performance, but it's just saying that the perception of pain is going to subside a little bit because it's been trained. Remember, well, you know this just as well as I do. Adaptation is the name of the game. How do I get you to adapt to what I'm exposing you to? And if I make you sit and do a cognitive task for 10 minutes straight, that means your brain's going to get more susceptible or less susceptible to the perception of fatigue because now it's been through that fatigue without physically taxing itself, but the same neurons are being fired. And that's what it's about.
Man, that's fascinating. That's like, it's really cool. Like I've seen videos with you working with, different athletes in different facilities, like I said, but to hear you break it down that way is really fascinating. It's cool to hear how that all ties together, really. For people like myself, people that are working with these athletes on a day-to-day basis that maybe don't have someone taking care of the cognitive conditioning side for them, do you have some basic ways that, we can start to integrate these kind of drills into our physical training? So if I've got an hour with an athlete, like some basic things that I can do to start integrating, decision-making, these things in an effective manner, because that's again been my biggest thing is like I like to add these reactionary elements to drills because I know it's important, but I don't have a huge rhyme or reason to like this many reps or exactly what's going into it. I just know having them make decisions while they're training is going to benefit them, but to be able to break it down a little bit more I think would be extremely beneficial.
Yeah, so one of the simplest things you can do is use something called working memory. So give a little breakdown. Working memory is the aspect of processing where you take in information. So it's like it's a short-term memory. So short-term memory is just, okay, I hear something, I take it in, and it's held for a few seconds till I figure out what to do. Working memory is like that, but it's a little bit different. So it's held, like you hear, like if I say 10 numbers, 8, 9, 5, 7, 9, 3, 2, 5, 4, 3, 9, 8. I don't know if that was 10, but you hear those numbers. Imagine I said it slower. So when your brain takes that in, it has to hold that information. And usually what you do is what? You repeat it over and over in your head. So that's using something called working memory load. So just like you talk about workload with physical performance, it's the same kind of concept. So you want to do drills that put a lot of stress on working memory. So ways you can do that is simple as what I just did. Give them a set of numbers. So typically 5 is considered a moderately low load. But 7 is usually where humans start to fall off a little bit. Now, as they get better, they'll get higher. So I like to do a drill I call number knocking. So you can literally do this with your clients tomorrow. So I'll write it all down because that's the thing about the practitioner. When you're doing drills like this, you have to keep track of it. So I'll write a set of, let's say, 12 numbers, but I want them to remember 7, right? So I'll circle out of the 12, I'll circle 7 of them and I'll try to spread them out. So every time I say a number that's circled, I knock. So they're only remembering the numbers that I knock on. So let's say if I did, for example, if I was like 8, 6, 3, 4, 9, 2, 1, 8, 6. Now I didn't get you ready for that, but let's assume you're ready for that. I would say recite them back. And you only would recite the ones you heard when I knocked. So now you got to discriminate. Now there's a decision-making process. Now to discriminate, and there's using that working memory because I heard 12 numbers, but only 7 matter. So you're using that load now. That's just a simple thing you can do between between sets. So something simple as that. Now, if you want to get more heavy duty, you can do things that require like movement as well. So a very simple one you can do, I call it fit arithmetic. So remember arithmetic in math in school, I call it fit arithmetic. So basically how this works, I usually take 3 to 4 color cones, red, yellow, green, and blue. and I'll assign each one a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, just to keep it simple. So I'll have the client maybe 2 to 3 feet away. Now chop the feet in place. So it'll be, like say, 4 cones, and they're in the middle of all 4. So if red is 1, blue is 2, green is 3, and yellow is 4, so they got to remember that. So working memory load is already there, 4 numbers. But they increase it now, they're chopping their feet, I'll say an equation. So let's say 2 plus 1, which is 3. And if you remember, 3 was green, they sprint the green. So now they have to process, 1, what the equation is, 2, which color was that number, and 3, sprint there. So all this takes mental and physical exertion. So I like to do these, like say, before I do a more memory task that they have to recall stuff, because now they're physically taxed, they're mentally taxed, and now when they're coming back down, so I'll do that for like 30 to 45 seconds, so it gets their heart rate up, so it's more anaerobic, but it's not going to be something that's going to be like extreme. Then I'll say, okay, now we're going to do the number down drill. And I still do these drills, so it's like, yeah, I got the fancy high-tech equipment, but I like to do these because it's a good variable. So these are just things you can throw in. Now, I do stuff if you want to do hand-eye coordination. I do stuff with tennis balls here and there, but because these are very popular because anyone can get a tennis ball. But like I say, you always got to emphasize the working memory. That's why I feel I differ, because a lot of them just throw it at you. You have to catch it maybe one hand or two hands together. Cool. But how much thinking is that needing? Not much. It is some. So what I'll do is I'll be like, I have them face the opposite way and like have one color represent a hand, like red is left hand, blue is right hand. And now they got to make decisions. And now they're not seeing it coming either. So if my back's against the wall and I'm waiting for it and it bounces off the wall and I have to quickly decide versus me seeing them just toss it to me. So that's one way. Or I'll do something else. I call it offsetting, which is basically an if not, like logic. So it's like, if I do this, you catch red. If I do that, you catch blue. So for example, I red and blue, I'll stand face to face. So pretend we're face to face right now. I'm holding red and blue tennis ball. So red is, say, left-hand catch, blue is right-hand catch. So if I throw it, the rules stay the same. But let's say I stuck my foot, didn't throw it, the rules flip-flop. So you always have to be aware. So you'd be surprised how many top-tier guys I get pissed off from that drill. And I'll do that like
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it at all.
So yeah, these are just simple things that require, and it's like, if you're a creative person, you take these, like I actually have a course where you can learn pretty much all these basic concepts. I'm actually coming out in probably, hopefully before the year's over, Mind Body One University, which would be kind of like Phil's mentorship. And it's going to be how to learn what I do to an extensive level. Because the course I have now is called Intro to Cognitive Conditioning, which is it's still deep. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to discount it at all. But it's not, if you take it, you'll learn what I can do to the minimal extent, which can integrate like that. But the MB1 University is going to be like, you can be able to set up a whole framework around this. So basically, the course, shameless plug, can get you ready to do at least the stuff you see on IG. But if you want to learn like how to make this efficient and run, that'll be the MB1 University later on this year.
Oh man, I have so many more courses I've got to start taking now. So these are just going to be added onto the list. That's like, yeah, I love all of this. Like I keep stumbling over my words because I got so much running through my head right now. But I love the way that you're implementing not just one little reaction, but, the person facing away. So they've got to react to the ball hitting the wall, but they've also got to react to the color, which means what hand they've got to grab the ball with. Like, because again, sports are so unpredictable. And, it is an element that I'm starting to hear more and more in our industry of like sports are unpredictable. So we need to add unpredictability into training. But then the way people are doing it, it's like, oh, we'll just play a game for 5 minutes before the session starts, which like, sure, add some unpredictability. You're doing some reacting and all of that, but to see the structure that can be put into adding that unpredictability and adding that thinking and that reaction time into a training session is really fascinating stuff. I'm really enjoying learning about this, and I'm definitely going to be hitting up that course too.
Most definitely.
And so if you're talking to somebody right now, obviously, hopefully, if they've listened to this interview specifically or dug much into what it is you do, they'll be convinced. But if you're talking to somebody right now who still feels like, oh, the mental side, cognitive training, whatever, and they're not really convinced that, this is something they really need to put concentrated effort into, if you had 1 minute, what would you say to that person to say, no, this is why this is an important thing that you need to put time into if you want to succeed?
So simply put, I would ask them, why do you do any other skill training? Like, let's use fighting. That's probably the best analogy I can use because I work with a lot of them. Let's say they do mitt work. Hold the mitt. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, bop, bop. What are they doing? They're responding to an external stimulus. So what's any different from me having a light system, or reacting to a ball, or doing a tablet drill? The only difference is it doesn't mimic the actual drill. So that's going to be their first rebuttal is you got to train how you play. And you know that's not how it really works. No. Obviously, you train how you play in the actual skills. So what I would say to them is, okay, I get it doesn't look like fighting, or I get it doesn't look like basketball or baseball. I get that. But whenever you take in an instruction from a coach, whenever you see a defender coming at you, whenever you see a punch, whatever thrown at you, you're taking in that information visually. It's getting processed of what to do with it. And you have about 0.3 to 0.5 seconds to make a decision at best. So it's like, would you rather just leave that to chance? I always say, would you leave that to chance? Or would you want to do something that can consistently prime you to respond to external stimuli, get you in an uncomfortable situation to make you have to think fast under pressure? Because once again, all you're really doing is training the brain to respond to stress. And this one does not take any, for the most part, physical wear and tear on you. So you can simulate stress, simulate reaction, decision-making, simulate how you perceive and think under pressure without taking a single punch, without exerting a single effort physically. Why would you not want to do that? So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, man. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I've said for a long time that I really think that the cognitive element, the mental side of sport is extremely overlooked. And it's something that we don't put enough time or effort into. And I think for the most part, I know for myself and I know for a lot of people out there, it's simply not knowing what to do, not knowing how to approach it, not knowing, how to implement these things. So I got to say, I absolutely love the work you're doing. And, I think over the coming years, even more so than it has already, it's going to keep blowing up because as people see the difference that the athletes who see you regularly and the other people who see you regularly are starting to make, I think people are going to be more and more drawn to this kind of training. So I really, really appreciate what you're bringing to the world of sport.
Thanks. And it's one thing I want to add to that last question is like, I was just thinking in my head, but when you really think, like, look at the terms like a lot of coaches use for an athlete, like they'll say something like, he has court vision. He's always aware. And when you really think about it, that goes back to what I talked about earlier, working memory.
Yeah.
Because all that really, court vision or being high athletic awareness is really just being able to take in a lot of information, quickly process it, and make a decision. That's literally what working memory is. So it's just that, I guess, for lack of a better word, they're uneducated in the field, so they write it off, but they don't understand these underlying mechanisms. Because I promise you, we can make a whole nother show of this, but you set me down with like coaches from any sport and tell them to use terms like, oh, he has great court vision or field awareness or athletic intelligence or whatever it is, I can break down the cognitive standpoint. Even personality-wise, if you say, oh, he's a natural born leader, that's being high on extroversion, social boldness. That's a whole personality trait I can go deep into because that's actually is my specialty. And when it comes to the mental, I did a lot of research and I have an article published on that research about mental toughness and personality. So when people say he's a natural born leader, that means he probably scored high on a trait that we call social boldness. Or if you say he's hard to coach, he might be low on agreeableness, which is how we work in groups. Or he's not a team player. You know what I'm saying? So it's like,
yeah,
I can, like, you just kind of inspired me. I haven't read an ebook in the last month, so I think I need to put out a new ebook. I think I'm going to do that thing. I'm going to give you a credit and I'm going to give you a shout out in the thank yous in the back.
Oh man, absolutely. That sounds great. But actually that brings up another thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Like a lot of this interview, I've gotten a lot out of it that I know I'm going to be implementing into my own coaching in the next coming while. But on those traits, like something like being a natural born leader or, being low on agreeableness, which means they're hard to coach. How can athletes go about working on these sort of things? Like whether it's, things they can do at home or, if they know there's a certain personality trait that's going to help them reach those next levels of sport. Are there basic things they can do to maybe pick out those weaknesses in their character, but then also like, what can they start to do to work on those weaknesses? I know that was kind of broad, but
no, I get it. That was actually perfect because a lot of people say you can't change and personality is pretty constant through life, which is true, but you can, like you say, have ways to accommodate it, because if you're an introverted person, you're probably always going to be an introverted person. But you have to just be able to learn in what scenarios you need to perform in to be more extroverted. So let's use, I'll use three. I'll use introversion, introversion, extroversion, and conscientiousness and agreeableness. So conscientiousness is planning, organization, being goal-oriented, perfectionism. That's conscientiousness. So you look at sport, you got to be high on that, because you have to be structured, organized with your time, your efforts, being on practice on time, punctuality. You have to have that. So the question is, if you're low on that, obviously there's a lot of athletes that are low on that like do not plan. They just go with the flow, get there when they get there, and that's bad. So what they could do is, okay, if I know I'm late all the time, I need to set my clock to leave extra early, because I actually do that, because I used to have trouble, not because I'm just a guy who shows up late, but I got so much going on. I had to make sure that I get there extra early. So I knew that. So that's one way to look at it. Or say you're bad with goal setting. Literally write out goals. Like, it sounds so simple, but you'd be surprised how many people have never written out their goal. And they just know, hey, I'm gonna be the best. What does the best look like? That's a very, very vague. A good goal, you should look at the process first, not the outcome. The outcome is needed. Like, say, I want to be the lead scorer on my team. That's an outcome. But how do you get to the outcome? You can't control outcomes. People argue with me all the time. I can control the outcome. If I work hard and do my best, I'll win. Lies. Because I ask them, okay, do you win every time? No. So you choose to lose? No. Oh, so you can't control the outcome. Shut up, sit down. And they'll be like, all right. So basically what I say is the process. So instead of being like, I want to be the best scorer, the process would be, okay, I need to put in an extra 50 shots or 100 shots after the ones that I need to do. So guess what? I can't guarantee that I'll be the best scorer, but guess what? That process will help me get better to be a better scorer. So it's just something just simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, just because, again, the amount of times where I talk to an athlete, I say, okay, what's your goal for sport? And they're, they want to shoot high, which is awesome. But then there's no sort of thought process on, well, if I want to, be the top goal scorer on my team, what do I need to do to be the top goal scorer on my team? Like, they just sort of say, okay, I want to do this, and then that's it. Right. So it's like, again, like you said, you can't control. I like the idea of just setting sort of more process related goals of, I'm going to take an extra 100 shots after the ones that we were doing in practice every day, because that's going to improve my ability to shoot. And if my ability to shoot has been improved, chances of me scoring more goals is higher. So if I want to be the top scorer on my team, what do I actually have to do to get there?
Exactly.
Man, I like that a lot. Man, so again, I wanted to say thanks so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate you taking all the time to do this, but keeping the goal of the show in mind of, teaching athletes what it really takes to create success in sport. And obviously this one, we've hit a lot more of the training side of things, but is there anything, based around what you do and what you kind of bring to the table that you feel like we should hit on a little bit more before we wrap up?
Yeah, so I guess I like to use my own story. Like, I gave a little brief example of some of the trials and tribulations, but I'm big on understanding that there's no perfect run, there's no perfect time, there's no perfect game, there's no perfect score. Everything is shown nowadays. It's 2021, so we see the end result of almost everyone's highlights on social media or superstars that we love and follow. But I think that does a disservice. So I like talking about the downside. Like, my first year of college, like I said, I lost my athletic and academic scholarship and was kicked out of school. And I tell people, you're going to have adversity. And I know this is very typical and cliche, but I don't think it gets enough light. And I feel like you should take risks, because the reason I had so much adversity, I think, in my life, I'm a big risk taker. Now, I'm not saying just do anything negligently, but put yourself, because if you're an athlete, your literal premise of what you do is putting the most work for the least reward. That's literally what you're doing. It sucks. I get it. I've been there. I was an athlete since I was 5. I'm 32 now, and though I'm not in the best shape, I can still get down. So it's like, it's in me. It's in us. But you got to understand, you're living a life where you literally train 4 to 5 days a week, 2 to 3 hours a day for an hour to 2 hour game. Or if you're a track guy, a 30-second, 20-second, 10-second race. not very much going on there. And you lose, you get clowned, you win, you get underappreciated. So
or if you're a fighter, 3 fights a year.
Yeah. So it's a thankless job. I call it work. Actually, when I was doing my doctorate, I dropped out like Kanye. But my thesis was going to be on. I did something I call work incongruence, which is a personality trait theory what I came up with, because there's things like grit, which talks about staying persistent, but grit I feel doesn't go into the full spectrum because it likes to preach on consistent and staying in the same lane. If you look at my story, I was a teacher, I was a strength coach, I was a mental trainer, I was a therapist to be, I was a psychologist to be, I was an addiction center. I've done so much. If you look at that, you're like, this guy doesn't know what the hell he wants to do. But the thing is, I was consistent in a different way. Like, it sounds so backwards, but that consistency of inconsistency kept me going. And that's literally what a sport is. It's the ups and downs that you constantly are going to have to deal with. Like, if I'm lying to you, stop me. But I feel that we overlook to think there's just like a linear progression, where it's cumulative, meaning it's not just one straight ascension. It's the collection of every endpoint of your journey. Because you could be here, there, back here, but as long as that total of all your efforts end up there, who cares how it goes? And we got to get out of this linear progression, which that's just unrealistic.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think that's a perfect analogy too, or a perfect way to talk about that as well, because, you know, like I mentioned, like I work with a number of fighters here in Calgary, and right now our lockdown measures and everything with COVID are insane. And so a lot of them have been over a year since they've had a fight. And it's tough in the day-to-day to, you know, when this is what you want to do with your life, it's tough in the day-to-day when you're dealing with not being able to compete, being told that, you know, you can't train, and now you've got to train outside, and now you're only allowed to train one-on-one. And now we're back to, like, with these things changing every day, it's tough to stay focused, you know, with the goals in mind. So to hear you say that, I think, is a really powerful message too, of it's not going to be that linear ascension, but as long as the cumulative effort is pushing you in that direction, it is going to pay off. It just might not feel like it is right now.
Not at all.
Man, I love that. So if there's somebody that's listening to the show right now and they're looking to get in touch with you just about the work that you do and everything that you bring to the table, what's the best way for them to go about that?
So I guess at Mr. Mental Muscle, MR Mental Muscle. And that's the best way to reach me. I answer pretty much most of my messages. Sometimes I get lost in transition, but I try my best to keep up with anyone. That's the best way. I have a website, www.the, as in Mike, B as in boy, 1, the numeral.com. So www.themb1.com. We can see other stuff. So yeah, so I'm always posting content on IG. Get my YouTube up and running finally. So there'll be a lot more coming out. So just hit me up on there anytime, people.
Guys, and just so I can reiterate this as well, if you're an athlete, if you're a coach, if you're anybody involved in the performance industry in any way, please take some time and check Nick's content out. He does a lot of really great stuff. And I mean, even just this past interview, man, I've said it already, but I'll say it again. There's so much going through my head right now. And I've got a lot of things that I know I'm going to be adding to my own coaching arsenal, thanks to this past hour. So thank you again for that.
Problem.
Everybody out there listening, this has been the Elite Development Podcast with Kenny Dussault and Nick Davenport.